And in parallel, sir, we want to be on the moon, not above the moon, looking down on the Chinese. I do want to talk about that competition for a second. This is not necessarily like the 1960s, where it turns out in hindsight we had almost unlimited schedule margin. No one's been back to the moon since Apollo 17, when American footprints last set foot on the moon. This is different now. I say it often that the difference between winning and losing will be measured in months, not years. And that should create a sense of urgency. And that should cause us to rethink some of our historic approaches to get extremely focused. You know, prior to having a geopolitical rival, I don't blame us for spreading thin at times and trying to, you know, work with everybody and try and, you know, bring goodwill around the world under our mission. But when you do have a competition, you do not want to lose. So I would say, yes, we have outlined some ambitious and bold programs. That's what we should do at NASA. But most importantly, sir, I would say we've outlined achievable plans. So Artemis 1 flew uncrewed November 2022, didn't fly again until April 1st of 2026. That is not a good cadence for that rocket. That is a very complicated rocket, 5 prime contractors. I don't know how many subcontractors in it on decades-old designed hardware that people aren't as familiar with. You need muscle memory to do that. So our proposal coming out of it is, let's get back in the business of launching moon rockets with frequency. Let's standardize. Why would we launch this 2 times and then do a dramatic departure to the upper stage of a completely unproven piece of hardware that's, I think, $4 billion or so over budget? Why don't we work with the OEM that was making it, that acknowledged there was some shortcomings here, and pick something from one of their JVs that's in production, that's got decades of flight heritage, put that on top of the rocket, standardize the launcher, launch again in 27. So we're borrowing from the playbook that worked for us in the 1960s, not jumping right from Artemis 2 around the moon, waiting 3.5 years to land on it. Launch again, rebuild muscle memory in 2027, test the interoperability of the Orion spacecraft and the landers in low Earth orbit, where if something goes wrong, you're not all the way out there 250,000 miles away. You're just a couple hours from being in the water. Learn from that, and then get incredibly good. Rebuild core competencies so we can turn that launch pad, not in years but months, so you have 2 at-bats in 2028 to make sure we get to the landing before our rival does. And in parallel, sir, we want to be on the moon, not above the moon, looking down on the Chinese. Gateway was an interesting concept in 2017 when we weren't faced with a Chinese rival that could potentially beat us back to the moon. Now we want infrastructure on the surface. We want American standards on the moon for power, for communication, for mobility and logistics, for crewed rovers, uncrewed rovers, surface improvements, and habitation. And I think working to get that infrastructure on the moon in parallel, so when our astronauts land in 2028, they can get in their rover and drive around their moon base, is the ultimate priority.